Welcome to another episode of Mysteries Unknown. I am really excited about this podcast tonight. I've got Monty with me, and Monty has got one of the most incredible encounters I have ever heard with a cryptoid or a Bigfoot. You guys don't want to miss this episode. Really scary. This story will keep you up at night for sure. So before we jump into that, I just want to say thank you so much for all the support. Without you guys, this would not be possible. But let's just jump right into the story. Monty, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Josh.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you here. I know this is a story that you've kind of hesitated on sharing, and I'm glad that you decided to come forward with it. But take us back to about 7.5 years ago to Central North Carolina and kind of walk us through this encounter.
This took place in the Uwharrie National Forest, which is in Central North Carolina in the Piedmont area. I live not far from there. It was 49 miles from my door to this campground. But to give you a little background of why we went there, you know, like a lot of people you talk to, I grew up as a kid. I was fascinated by, you know, cryptid stuff. I remember being 5 years old, 6 years old in the late 70s watching In Search Of with Nimoy. And that kind of kindled my interest in subjects like, you know, lake monsters, river monsters, Bigfoot, whatever, UFOs, you know. I always thought, you know, everything we heard at the time, you know, all the way up through, heck, until the advent of the internet, was that if these things exist, Bigfoot, I mean, it's in the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, you know, Alaska, so, you know, way up there. I never gave any thought growing up. I played in the woods a lot here in North Carolina. I never gave any thought to anything like that. I thought I knew all the creatures that were around here. That was until about 2013, 2014. There was a story that hit the local news here about a guy that captured some thermal footage in Uwharrie National Forest at a campground there. So I tracked this guy down, and we had a great conversation on the phone. And he said, you know, I said, man, I'd love to maybe join you sometime when you go up there. And he's like, sure, happy to have you. He said, I go up there about 3 or 4 times a week. He told us exactly where this thermal footage was captured, and he said, here's where I'm going to be. So we went to the campground, found that in 2014. After that, my son and I went back several times over the course 2014, 15, and 16. So fast forward to July 2016. And in those previous times, all we'd ever experienced was really just auditory stuff. I don't know what the word, audible, auditory stuff. Never seen anything, you know, we didn't have rocks thrown at us or anything like that, you know, didn't really hear any descriptive howls. It was just, you'd hear things like trees snapping, trees getting pushed over. You know, the first time we were there, within 10 minutes of sitting by the fire, we heard what sounded like somebody taking a 8-foot section of log that probably weighed about 600 pounds and just dropped it and rolled it down the hill. Didn't see anything, but just weird stuff like that. So I invited my father too. He was coming for the first time, and the only people that had been up there were me and my son, you know, between 2014 and 2016. So this time my daughter was with us and my father, who was 68 years old at the time of this. We get up there that Thursday evening, kind of late, and we're struggling to put up this 10-man tent. My dad had brought a brand new 10-man tent, which was ridiculously huge for us. We finally get it up, and I'm exhausted. It's hot. It's so hot, man. You know, nothing's really going on. You know, we're having a good time, you know, grilling hot dogs and stuff. And about 11 o'clock comes, and we decide to all get in the tent. So we're all in the tent. And my daughter was beside me on one side of the tent. You know, we joked that the thing was so big, it had a west wing and an east wing. And, you know, so I was in the west wing, right? And with my daughter and my dad and son were in the east wing. My daughter goes to sleep almost instantly, pretty quick. My son and my dad, they talked with each other, you know, whispered a little bit, and then they kind of fell asleep. Whereas when I go up there, if at all possible, I try to stay awake all night, because that's when you tend to hear the stuff. So the cicadas, whatever brood this was their year, and they came out strong, man. It was loud. So I'm laying there. I'm laying on my belly and my elbows, and I'm looking out. And this 10-man tent had mesh window. It had windows on every side, which was cool, because your usual tent has one in the front, of course, maybe one in the back. So I'm laying on my belly and my elbows, and I'm looking up, through the mesh, and I'm listening. I would guess about 2:30 a.m. I heard rapid wood knocks, very loud, rapid. They were either 4 or 5, and it was like pop, 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 pop. And it wasn't a gunshot, because that's what people might confuse. But you can tell the timbre of a wood knock versus a gunshot, right? It was wood on wood, and it was very rapid. And it was so rapid that I couldn't have done that swinging on one tree like that get that force into it. I perk up and I'm like, oh boy, never heard that before up here. I've heard other stuff, but nothing like that. And you instantly think, that every show you watch or thing you read online, that's an indication of Bigfoot activity. So I whispered over to my dad and my son, who were in the East Wing, kind of wake up. Hey, listen, guys, I just heard, wood knocks. And my dad, he's alert now too. He says, okay. And then we all sit there. My son kind of too. He's kind of, I don't think he was as excited about it, but my dad, we were alert. And we listened about 10 more minutes. Nothing, the cicadas were still going, but nothing happened. And then after about that 10-minute mark, everything went quiet. Those cicadas shut up. I mean, it was so noticeable. It was like being next to an electric fan. All of a sudden somebody cuts it off or something. And we're like, whoa, okay. I got the wood knocks, and now everything went quiet. I may have heard crickets or something, maybe. But it went from like what seemed like 120 decibels down to, nothing. So my dad whispered over to my son, the cicadas have stopped. The cicadas have stopped. And if he said it one time, he must have said it 6 times. And eventually, and I regret this now, I kind of said, because he's my father and I respect my father, I was like, shut up. We know the cicadas will stop. Listen. I was like, listen. He couldn't even see me. It was so dark in the tent, but I would say, listen. So he finally shut up. And a few minutes later, I can't tell you when, it was either, I don't know if it was a minute or 10 minutes, but eventually, again, I'm laying on my belly and on my elbows, and I'm looking out. And my dad, he can look behind me, right? Because his spot, he's below that mesh window, and I didn't want him to get up on his knees or anything, so he's looking out behind me, and I'm looking out over him. And so help me, I see these bright, glowing blue eyes coming towards me. And they seemed like they were pretty high up. I mean, it could have been because I was on my stomach and I'm having to arch my neck up, but these things seemed to come in and they would get a little bit lower, almost like it was floating. I didn't hear a sound. I had no walking, but it came in almost like they were floating and closer and closer. And I'm like, oh my God, is this really happening? My heart's pounding, I could hear it in my ears. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I even looked down a couple times and, looked up and kind of, is this really happening to me? And I'm saying all this very quietly. I'm whispering, if anything. And they got closer and closer and closer. And again, I told the only thing I could say to my son and my dad at that instant was, I see eye shine. And I whispered it very as quietly as I could. I was like, I see eye shine, because I knew they would instantly understand that. But this was not eye shine. Eye shine is caused by someone pointing a light source at an animal in the woods, and it reflects off the back of the retina. It was so dark. It was ink black dark that night. We couldn't see each other in the tent. I couldn't see my hand. People say that, but it's true. I couldn't see anything other than these glowing eyes coming at me. I think there was a sliver of a crescent moon that night, and we were under heavy canopy, and so it's dark in there, real dark. So it wasn't eye shine. These things were self-illuminating. So right then, I'm like, okay, this is not known anywhere in the animal kingdom. Anything on the zoological, biological, nothing. There's nothing like that. There are some marine vertebrates and invertebrates in the deep oceans that have bioluminescence, but nothing that walks on 2 legs or walks on land that we know of. So right then, I'm looking at something that's uncatalogued. But again, my heart is pounding, and this thing comes to what I estimate is within about 12 to 15 feet, so 4 to 5 yards, maybe a little bit closer. And it so it cocks its head. I see these eyes like a dog cocks its head when it hears something. You know, it just like it's trying to get a better look at me. So, man, now I just got this sick feeling in my stomach. My heart's pounding. I reach over. I always keep my pistol next to me. We go with pistols. And I told you, it's not because of animals. I just don't like people. Yeah, I fear people the most when I go out in places like that. You know, I'm wary of people. But I knew this wasn't a person. But so I reached over slowly without making any sound. I grabbed my pistol and I had it in my hand. And I'm thinking, I might have to shoot out the back of this tent. After this thing cocked its head, I told my son, I don't know if I told him right after that or before that, I said, son, lay down. Because he was in the east wing and he was right across from me. I said, son, lay down. Keep your head down because I might, I don't know what's going to happen. I might have to shoot this thing. I didn't want to do that, but, I had my hand on my gun, and my dad and my son are still hunkered down because I didn't want them to get up on their knees and look because it would rustle the floor of the tent, and make noise. And I didn't want to spook off whatever this was or scare it into doing something, violent. I don't know. But so it cocked its head and then it straightens up and it slowly backs away. Just as silently as it came in. Never heard a sound. It backed away until I actually, at that point, got up on my knees to see it, where it went. And when I got up on my knees and looked out, I could again see the eyes. They were probably 20, 25 yards away, 60 to 75 feet. But now I see two sets of glowing eyes, right? I see a taller one, which I think was the one that came to the tent. And there's one to its, it would have been to its, my right to its left, that was shorter, but the same blue eye. So now I got at least two of these things looking at me. So again, I can't believe all this. My hand's on my gun. I said, Dad, Dad, do you want your gun? He said, yeah, pass me up my gun, because his pistol had been next to me. So I handed his pistol to my son, and my son handed it over to him. So now there's two people, hands-on pistols. And I can't say if these eyes, if they closed their eyes and turned and went away, or they just disappeared. They were gone. So I'm still stunned, right, by all this. And now we're talking louder at that point, because this thing came within, it obviously knows we're there. But my dad now gets up and starts looking around. Of course, he doesn't see them, because they'd gone by then. But shortly after that, the cicadas are still quiet. We see two large orbs of light, balls of light that come in from my left to the right over us. Okay, and when I say orbs, I think most people think like ghost orbs, where they're like translucent. They look like bubbles, almost like bubbles in photographs, right? That's not what I'm talking about. These were like street lamp globes. They were, I would say the bigger one was probably at least the size of a basketball, maybe a little larger. And it was just self-illuminated, glowing bright white. It was kind of opaque, couldn't see through it, very bright white. And then there was a smaller one that came along behind it that was, I would say, orange and bluish, kind of shimmering. So it was somewhat translucent, but it was shimmering with different colors. So now these things, we all see these now. My son can see them, my dad can see them, and thank God my daughter stayed asleep, because she probably would have freaked out. But now we're all up on our knees. We're talking. We're not whispering anymore. We're like, what the heck are these things? They're right above us, the big one and the smaller one. And it's strange in that when I think of a ball of light, it should emit some light to illuminate what's around it, right? But we weren't illuminated in any way. It's still dark when I look out all the mesh windows, and believe me, I was doing that because I'm the one that saw these eyes. I was more worried about these two sets of eyes than I was looking up at these orbs. I didn't really give a crap. I mean, at that point I was like, okay, that's interesting. But I'm looking for all around me, my gun in my hand. I'm expecting something to reach into the tent or slap the tent or try to get into the tent, because I saw something walk up to the tent. I saw this. And, so that's kind of what I'm concentrating on. I'm not really, I see the orbs. I acknowledge that they're there. They're talking about it, my dad, my son. But I'm really more concerned about looking at it every window I can. I don't want anything to sneak up on me if I got to, fire out on it or whatever. But around that time we saw the orbs, shortly, we started hearing all these sounds around us. I mean, it got, by sounds, I mean, there was snapping twigs. We could hear what sounded like footsteps, shuffling. It's almost as if somebody had jogged into the camp, because the campsite was on soft packed gravel, like hard packed gravel. But in other words, it crunched when you walked. You could hear. It sounded like somebody was jogging into that and kind of around us. We heard stuff snapping around us, shuffling. All the while, the orbs are still up here above us, right? And this goes on for what seemed like forever. And my son starting to kind of panic at this point, because he can tell Dad's nervous, right? And Dad's told him to lay down, or and his grandfather and Dad got hands on their guns, so he could tell, like, okay, if these guys are nervous, I should be nervous. So he says, he's like, Dad, can we get out of here? Let's just go get out of here. So, like, real quick in my head, I'm working through the logistics. Rapid. I'm like, okay, all right, let me think about that. Okay, I'm gonna have to pick up my daughter, who's probably 70, 80 pounds, put her over my shoulder like a sack of potatoes with a gun in my hand. I got to unlock the tent, stumble out of that, and still go by whatever the hell it was that was out there to get to my car. I wasn't willing to take that risk. I was like, no, we're not going to do that. And he's like, okay, Dad, can we call 911? And I'm thinking, okay. All right. Again, I'm rapidly working through the logistics in just a matter of a second or two. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, we could do that. But I don't even know how long it would take them to get there, because we're in the middle of nowhere. And I said, even if they could find you, get the campground and find you, and got there, what the heck am I going to tell them? They're not going to believe it. So I dismissed that, and I said, no, son. I think I just told him no, son, but in my head, I'm just like, I'm going to stay here with my hand on my gun and hope that it subsides. So we're hearing all this stuff, and my dad's got his hand on his gun. And I remember my dad saying, he said, I don't like this. He said, I don't like this at all. He said, it's like they're surrounding us. And then he prayed aloud. He said a quick prayer to Jesus. He said, Jesus, please protect us. And I'd kind of forgotten about that, but I remember him saying it. It was just something I wasn't thinking about. But he did say that, Jesus, please protect us. He said, I don't like this at all. And pretty fairly quickly after he said that, everything just subsided. The woods, I don't know when the cicadas came back necessarily, or that they did, but I just know that we no longer heard shuffling. We didn't see anything. The orbs had just, I don't know if they dissipated, like they disappeared essentially. I don't know if they faded down to where they were not visible, or they took off. I don't know, but we're there in the dark, total darkness, again, and we're really shaking. And I forgot to tell you, during that time when the orbs were there, sorry to jump around on that, but when the orbs were there, again, we weren't whispering at that point. We're up on our knees and started hearing the stuff. And my son asked me, do you want me to shine a flashlight out there? And I think my dad had asked me that earlier too, when the eyes were coming up, and I didn't want him to do that when the eyes were coming up, because I think it would spook it, whatever it was, if he shined a flashlight. And two, it was kind of a guttural fear of, I don't know if I really want to know what those eyes belong to, right? If you shine a light out on all of a sudden, who knows? It could go King Kong on the tent or whatever. I don't know. So I told my dad no when he asked. But at this time, when the orbs came in and we were comfortable talking at our normal volume and up on our knee, my son asked me, do you want me to shine a light on it? And this time I said, yeah, what do we got to lose? Shine a light out on it. So he stuck the kind of a high-powered flashlight we had right up on the mesh, and on this thing, on the bigger one. And so we can now see the tree that it was next to, a tree, a pine tree. Whatever those two were, orbs, it didn't seem to matter that we were looking at them with a flashlight. We still heard the sounds around us. And then I told my son, I was like, son, get your Pawpaw's, call him Pawpaw here, people call him Grandpa, but I said, get Pawpaw's car keys, his key fob, because we drove my dad's car because he had like a hatchback thing that was better for putting the camping equipment in. So I said, grab Pawpaw's key fob and hit the lock button a couple times, because that makes, it makes the headlights flash and you hear the horn honk. And so it was kind of a last resort, other than shooting or something. He does that with the key fob, and the lights go off and the horn does. He does it a couple times. It didn't have seemed to have phased these orbs at all. They're still there. And then shortly after that, that's when my dad said, Jesus, please protect us, and everything went, everything went away and kind of went dark and quiet again. So now it's all, we think it's kind of past, and I would guess we stayed in there another hour. Eventually I felt comfortable enough to get out of the tent at that point, and I had a flashlight and my pistol. I never relinquished that, and I must have looked like a lighthouse. I was shining that thing around 360-degree circuit. And I got to my camp chair, which was by the fire pit, and at that point I turned my light off. And it's like, I'm just going to sit here and listen, man. You talk about eerie. Now a lot of that's probably psychological. There could have been nothing there, but in my mind, I'm thinking, the boogeyman, right? Your mind plays with you. So it's dark. Everybody else is still in the tent. They didn't want to come out yet, but I'm there and I'm sitting in my camp chair. Man, it's spooky. I just feel like there's eyes on me, and I would turn my flashlight back on again as soon as I thought I heard something, and scan it, turn it off again. And I noticed at that point, I started to smell what smelled to me like roadkill or rotten meat at that point. And I didn't think about it in the sense of being associated with what we saw. I just thought, okay, there was a creek bed down in the little holler behind us. And I said, it's probably something died down there and rotting away in the creek bed. It wasn't until later that I thought, well, yeah, if that was the case, you would have smelled it all evening while you were out there by the campfire, and you wouldn't just all of a sudden smell it at 5:30 in the morning or whatever time it was. So we at some point I got back in the tent, and as soon as the sun came up, we just chucked everything. We didn't fold anything. We didn't. It wasn't neat. We just threw everything we could throw in the back of the vehicle my dad had, and got out of there. And on the drive home, which took about close to an hour, it was 49, 50 miles to my house, and it took about an hour or so, hour and 5 to get there with speed limits and everything. But during the ride home, my son and my daughter were asleep, and my dad then turns to me at that point and says, MD. He calls me MD. I'm Monty Jr., so my middle initials is Damon. So he calls me MD. He said, MD, I saw faces in those orbs. And I'm thinking, what? And he said, MD, I saw faces in those orbs. And it shocked me because that wasn't what I experienced, right? And I have to think that's only because I didn't stare at them. Remember I told you I was more concerned about looking in each window. Something was going to reach in and try to get to the tent. And I imagine while I was doing that, he was staring intently at these orbs. And he says that one of them had a very benign man in the moon type face, not threatening at all, just he could see it. He said, but the bigger one, which I guess was the more opaque one, the wider one, he said that one had a very stern visage. He described it as some sort of like Aztec or Incan sun god, if you've ever seen those things. And I sent a sketch of you. When we got home within the first 5 days, he did some sketches, and he noted everything on there. He did a bird's eye view of the camp, the time, the temperature. That's my dad. Time, the temperature, where everything was oriented in the camp, and then he drew images, his recollection of these faces, these orbs. And sure enough, that one of them looks very much like some sort of, stern Aztec Incan sun god that had rays kind of coming out, and I'm not going to tell the guy he's crazy, or I was there beside you, but that's not what I saw exactly. And I have to think it's just because he was staring at him and I wasn't. I was looking elsewhere because I'm the only one that saw the eyes. So, that's pretty much the extent of it. I get home and I tell my wife, and he tells my mom, his wife, and they both, it's kind of insulting, I guess. They didn't come out, and it just kind of went in one ear and out the other. You know what I mean? Like it didn't register. I don't know if they thought we were goofing or what, but over time, they've come to accept that, what we saw. But initially, I don't know if they thought we were serious or not. But when my son also told them what we saw, I think they just kind of realized we had a strange experience. But that started me down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out what the heck this was, right? Because when it comes to Bigfoot, like I said, if these things exist, my thought was at the time, if these things exist, they're animals. They're undiscovered animals, not unlike the lowland gorilla in Africa wasn't discovered to the early 1900s. They're just some sort of undocumented bipedal primate, right? They eat, they sleep, they drink water, they make baby Bigfoots, okay? But what I saw that night, it doesn't fit any known description. And I'm not saying what I saw was a Bigfoot. That's why I was there, right? Because of the history of that area and the sightings previously. That's why I was there. But I didn't see a body. I didn't see a nose or a brow ridge. All I saw was these glowing eyes, which they were human shaped, like ours, but they were bigger. I don't know if they were as large as an egg, but maybe one of the smaller range of eggs. They were definitely larger than ours. But I didn't see a head or a body or anything. I'm kind of glad I didn't. So I'm not even saying what I saw was a Bigfoot. When I told people about this, they've come back with, man, that could have been ghosts. That could have been aliens. That could have been Bigfoot. So I'm not going to say it was Bigfoot. I think that's probably, my gut feeling is that's what it was, because I then started to read about other encounters people had with glowing eyes and seeing Bigfoot simultaneously. But unlike my case, usually they mention like a dull red glowing or a dull yellow, or I had to turn my head to the side to see these eyes because they were kind of dim. Man, these weren't dim. They were, and I sent you some screenshots of a close approximation of what it was. They were bright, and they were self-illuminating. No eye shine. These were self-illuminating. And I just went down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out, here I am 7 years later, and I'm no closer. Which is why ultimately I decided to share this with you, your channel, because like I said previously, I've shared with a couple of, I guess, well-known Bigfoot people, and they just, they were polite, but it didn't fit their paradigm, so they just weren't willing to even accept it, which it kind of annoyed me. If that happened to me, I would not have believed it. So, like you said earlier when we talked off camera, once you had your encounter, you didn't snicker anymore at people that bring up stuff that may seem outlandish. And I'm in the same boat, man. It made me, it opened my eyes to the possibilities of what's out there, to where before this happened, I maybe would have snickered at somebody, or if they would have mentioned eye glow, I would have said, you must be mistaken. That had to be eye shine or some kind of reflection. No, it was, if it hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't have believed it. So, 7 years on, with sharing it with folks here and there, I'm no closer to figuring it out. So I'm hoping that by sharing this on your channel, that maybe in the comment section, I may see somebody say, "Oh yeah, that happened to me in 1984," or, "This happened to me recently, and here's what I think this is, or these things were." I'm hoping that's kind of what I get out of it, because like I said, I'm no closer.
First off, I want to say thank you very much for sharing your encounter with my audience. I know they're really going to enjoy that. And guys, if you have any inkling of what he went through, please leave a comment, because, you know, this thing's a whole big mystery and there's so much to the story to unpack. And, you know, that's the reason for this community. The whole reason I started this channel was to have a platform that people can come on and just share their experiences, because I know what it's like to share something like that, and your family members or just different people look at you like, you know, they don't believe you, but obviously you know what you saw. You know, that's one of the scariest, strangest encounters I've heard so far doing this, and it literally gave me chills the first time we talked about this. And I knew I had to have you on the show, because I've never heard an encounter like that. But, you know, the more I get into this, I really think they're more spiritual. I look at things through the biblical lens, and thank goodness for your dad, you know, to have the fortitude to pray like he did. Because, I mean, there's power in prayer, and obviously it worked, because whatever was left, and I don't think they're good, but, you know, I always ask my guests this question, and you've kind of alluded to some of it, but how did that encounter change your life, Monty? Because that's a life-changing event. It's
been 2,000 something days since it happened. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about it. There's not a time when I walk past my front door here I'm in Rowan County where I live, and look out if I walk by 2 or 3 a.m. and look out, you know, expecting to see something glowing, you know, or but yeah, it's totally opened my eyes. Like I said, where things I hear from people I used to maybe snicker at, I don't anymore. But it's also kind of cool, right? It's kind of cool in that I realize, you know, God's universe is pretty incredible, right? Pretty incredible. And who knows if it's there, it was created by His hand. It may have been perverted at some point, but it was created by His hand. And, you know, as to what these things are, again, I never would have said this before it happened, but the closest person I've come to finding in the Bigfoot world that would probably understand this, or at least offer some scientific explanation for it, is Ron Moorhead. I don't know if you're familiar with Ron. But he wrote a book called Quantum Bigfoot that I read, where now it opens the possibility of them being interdimensional, right? Which I would have laughed at you if this hadn't happened. But I'm thinking, you know, I didn't put this together too much later, but I saw 2 sets of eyes. They went away, and now I saw 2 orbs. Did these somehow transform into these orbs? Because, again, the orbs, there was a larger one and a smaller one. And the eyes I saw were a taller one and a shorter one. I don't know. To me, it sounds preposterous, but I don't know. But, you know, reading Ron's book, I mean, again, I don't have a degree in quantum string theory, but he goes into some of that stuff where there's some kind of, you know, scientific evidence that some of that stuff is possible, right? Not in practice, but in theoretical. I don't know, man. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm hoping to say. You know, it just went way beyond them being flesh and blood, because that would also explain why you don't have bodies, or why you hear accounts of them disappearing, or you follow tracks on a sandbar in the middle of a 70-yard wide riverbed, and all of a sudden they just disappear in the middle of the sandbar, where they either had to leap 100 feet to the bank or get taken up in the air. You don't know. They just end, right? Weird stuff like that. I don't know. And it sounds preposterous saying that, but man, I just don't. It just opened my eyes. Another reason I'm sharing the story is, like I said, I'm hoping somebody can shed some light on it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can get you some answers, and maybe somebody listening has had a similar encounter. And, you know, I really think that they're, you know, anything from Nephilim, fallen angels, who knows what, but I definitely lean towards the spiritual side of things. And I think you hit the nail on the head, that there's a lot of things in God's universe that we maybe don't understand, that was created by His hand, but a lot of it was perverted. You know, anybody who reads the Bible can see pretty quickly that, you know, Satan can't create, but he can pervert. And I think that these things are not good. I think they're evil. You know, it makes you wonder if they were just curious or what was going on. But thank goodness that your dad prayed like he did, you know, because you guys might not be here today to tell that story. But thankful that you're here, and I appreciate you sharing that with our audience. And we'll try to get you some answers. Hopefully somebody's had an encounter like yours that they can share. But I always like to ask people, and you might, you know, I might be surprised by your answer, but if you had the opportunity to see something like that again, would you want to?
Yes. We've been up many times since and never experienced it. Like, we had gone before since 2014, and we've gone since. We go at least a couple of times a year, and haven't had anything like that July 29th, 2016, which was Friday. We went up on a Thursday the 28th and for Friday the 29th. Nothing like that since then. Again, we've heard strange things, but nothing with visual that we had. And no, but yeah, it's an interesting area. Then I started going down the research of that whole area, and indeed that whole Uwharrie area has been a hotbed of high strangeness, as they say, for a while. Going back a long ways. Apparently, I mean, those are the oldest mountains on Earth. That range, you know.
It seems like there's hot spots, you know, with these creatures and things, and it seems like where there's encounters with Bigfoot, there's orbs and lights, and things are kind of unexplained, and it really makes you wonder. But again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing that encounter with our audience, and we'll try to get you some answers, guys. If you have had an experience like Monty's, make sure to share it in the comments below. He would like to hear about it, and I would love to hear your encounter. And if you've got a mystery you would like to share with me, you can send it to me by my email at video@jazzcreativear.com. And like I always say, stay prayed up, guys. We'll talk soon.